There is a labyrinth inside your head. That is not a figure of speech. Behind each of your ears, sealed in the hardest bone your body owns, there is a small coiled chamber filled with fluid. Part of it holds a scatter of tiny crystals, and those crystals sit wherever gravity puts them. And they are the reason you know which way is down without checking. It is working right now. It is how you know, with your eyes closed, that you are lying flat. The anatomists took that name from an old Greek word, and the old Greek word belonged to a room on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and to the one who was kept inside it. Tonight, I am going to tell you his entire story. All of it. A promise a king made to the sea and did not keep. The queen who paid for it. The craftsman who built the only structure in the ancient world, designed so that nobody who walked in could find the way back out. The door. The 14 young people Athens put on a ship with a black sail. Again, and again, and again. The thread, and a whole sea that still carries the name of a man who stood on a cliff, looked at a piece of cloth on the horizon, and read it wrong. Here is the arrangement for tonight, and it is the only thing I will ask of you. A maze branches. It hands you choices, and most of them are wrong, and it is built to make you work. Tonight is not that. Tonight there is one path, and I know it by heart, and I am going to walk you down it at the speed of a person with nowhere to be, nothing to decide, no wrong turns available to you. Your job is to lie there. Down we go. Start in the dark, because that is where he is. Your dark is a courteous one. There is a streetlight out there doing its work, and a grey line under the door. And if you gave your eyes a minute, they would find the ceiling. Your dark is negotiable. His is not. It is total. And it is old. And it has been the same for so long that noon and midnight, up in the world above, have no meaning down here at all. Nothing changes color. Nothing dims. There is no grey line under any door, because the door is stone, and stone does not leak light. Now feel the shape of the place, the way it can only be known from inside. Put a hand out. What you touch is not rock. Caves are round and worn and wandering, made by water with no plan in mind. This is flat. This is cut. Your palm finds a corner, and the corner is a right angle, clean as a door frame. The kind of angle that exists because a man stood there with a tool and made it. Run your hand along and you'll find the seam where one block was set against the next, and the mortar line, and a few small chisel marks somebody left behind because he was working fast and figured nobody would ever see them. That is the first fact of this room, and it is the one that matters. Somebody built this. Somebody drew it and paid for it and hired the crews and came down to inspect the work. Feel the air. It is cool, the way a cellar is cool in August. And it never gets warmer, and it never gets colder. And it moves a little. Always. Drifting past your ankles from somewhere off to the left, which tells you that off to the left, the corridors keep going. It smells like wet stone and old dust. And under that, faintly, something green and mineral. The smell of a well. There is sound. But you have to be still a long while before you hear how much of it there is. Water moving somewhere, very far off. Patient, in no hurry. And the sea itself, up and out and above, coming down through the rock as a low push and release, so faint and so regular that it stops registering as a sound at all and becomes the pulse of the building. And breathing, slow, enormous, close. He is here. He has been here for years. He is lying against the wall in the dark, the way he lies at this hour. And there is a great deal of him. When he shifts his weight, the sound goes off down the corridors and comes back a moment later from 3 directions at once. Because that is exactly what these walls were made to do. Now hold still, because this morning is not like the other mornings. Sound has a long way to travel to get down here, and it changes on the trip. Layer after layer of cut stone stands between the middle of this building and the daylight, and every corner along the way takes a piece off a sound and passes the rest along, so that whatever arrives at the center has been rounded off and softened and stripped of the thing that made it recognizable. What gets here is weather. It is never information. He knows the ordinary weather. He has had years of it. There is the food door, which comes at intervals and is always the same. A scrape, a knock of something set down on stone. Then the closing, which is fast. There is the sound the guards make, which is boots and nothing else, because the men who work that door have been told not to speak, and they do not. This morning, none of that. This morning, what comes through the rock is a door opening somewhere very far up and staying open, then metal, then feet. And here is the part that has never happened before, because it is not two men, and it is not four. It is a crowd. It is more feet than have ever been on the other side of that stone at one time, moving together, stopping, moving again, the way people move when they are being walked somewhere in a line, and under the feet. Voices, not the flat two-word exchanges of guards on a shift. Voices with weather in them. The breathing at the center stops. Then there is a scrape of hide and bone against stone as something very large gets up off the floor and stands and turns its head toward the corridor and holds it there. Now come up out of it, all the way up, through the layers, past the storerooms and the light wells and the stairs, and out into a morning so bright it makes your eyes water. It is early summer on the north coast of Crete. The sun has been up 2 hours. The sea is doing what that sea does in June, flat and hard and blue all the way out, and the air smells like salt and hot stone and thyme. There is a ship in the harbor below the palace. She came in on the dawn wind, and the crew have already tied her off and gone up the hill, and she rides there, dark and quiet, because her sail is black. The people of that harbor have seen that sail before, and they know what it means. It means the count is due. It means 14 young people crossed the water from Greece and slept on that deck last night and are awake now. And it means that this morning, for the first time in 9 years, the great stone door on the north side of the palace grounds is going to be opened. Up on the terrace above the harbor there is a girl watching that ship, and she is the daughter of the king, and she has been counting these ships since she was old enough to count. Down the hill, in a courtyard, a line of young men and women from Athens are standing in the light with their hands empty, being looked at, and one of the 14 came up that road on purpose. That is the morning. That is where we are starting. None of it makes any sense at all until you know how a building like that came to exist on a rich island in the middle of a peaceful sea. And to get at that, I have to take you a long way back, to a promise, and a bull, and a king who needed very badly to be believed. Somewhere above him, in the light, a young man was walking up from the harbor with a promise in his mouth, and before the next sunrise one of the two of them would be dead. Sleep, if you are sleeping. There is one path, and I know it, and we have all night. Come at Crete the way a ship would, in the morning. From the north, the mountains stand up out of the water a long way off, and they keep getting bigger for hours. Then the coast resolves, and the harbor, and the hill above it, and on top of that hill, the biggest building anybody in that sea had ever put up. There are no walls around it. Sit with that for a second, because it tells you the whole story of the island in about 10 seconds. Every other power in that world built its capital behind stone. Crete built hers in the open, on a low rise a few miles inland, with the doors facing out and nothing but a road between her and the water. Later, Greeks remembered Minos as a man who ruled the sea, and whatever the truth of it was, the people who laid out that palace clearly expected trouble to be stopped a long way offshore. What it had instead of walls was scale. Go in through the west entrance, and you come into a paved court big enough to hold a few thousand people, laid in slabs of blue-grey limestone that are still flat and still fitted today. Around that court, the building climbs 3 and 4 stories, connected by wide staircases that turn around open shafts, cut down through the whole structure, so that daylight falls all the way to the bottom floors. Red columns, wider at the top than the bottom, which is a strange thing to see the first time. Painted walls everywhere. Now look at what is painted on them, because this is the part that matters tonight. Bulls, along the roof lines, cut in stone and set where you could see them from the courtyards below. There were horns, pairs of them, curved, taller than a person, standing up against the sky. They are among the most common things anybody has ever dug out of that island. And in that world, they were on shrines and rooftops and the tops of walls. Inside, it does not let up. There are drinking cups carved in the shape of a bull's head, dark stone with gilded horns and eyes of rock crystal, made to pour wine out of the muzzle. There are walls painted with bulls at full charge, and around the bulls there are young people. And that is the image that made this civilization famous. A bull going flat out, a girl at his horns, another figure upside down in the air above his back, in the middle of a handspring, a third landing behind him with both arms out. People have argued for over a century about what exactly they were doing. What is beyond arguing is that they were doing it with an animal that could kill them, in front of a crowd, on purpose. And they were proud enough of it to put it on the wall where guests would eat. Even the founding story of the royal house had a bull in it. The Greeks said the mother of the king came to that island carried across open water on the back of a white one, and her name was Europa. Her brother Cadmus spent his whole life looking for her and never found her. And, if you have kept another watch with me, you already know where that search took him instead. So that is the island. Rich, unwalled, confident. Its ships in every harbor in that sea, and bulls on every surface of it. In the paint, in the stone, on the roof, in the cups they drank out of, and into that, one generation, there came the oldest problem a royal house can have. The old king died and left 3 sons. Their names were Minos, Sarpedon, and Rhadamanthus. They did not get along, and the trouble between them was as simple as trouble gets. There was one throne. Picture the room, the painted hall, the council of Cretan nobles who actually decide these things, and 3 brothers with identical blood and identical claims, and every one of the 3 standing up in that hall and saying the same sentence, which is that the gods intend it to be him. That is the real difficulty Minos faced, and it is worth being precise about it, because everything that comes after grows out of it. His claim was not weak. His claim was ordinary. Everybody in that room had one exactly like it, and a claim that everybody can make is worth nothing at all. He needed something his brothers could not produce. Not an argument, not a family tree. He needed a thing that could be pointed at, out in the open, in daylight, in front of the whole island, on a day when nobody could ever say afterward that they had misunderstood what they saw. So he went down to the water, long before there was anything on that island to be afraid of. There were bulls on every wall of it. They did it on the shore, in the morning, with the whole island watching. That was the entire point. A private prayer proves nothing. Minos had this stage the way you stage anything you need people to remember correctly afterward. Out in the open on the sand below the palace, at an hour when the light was good, with the nobles of Crete standing in a rough half-circle behind him, and the fishing families packed in behind them, and the water, flat and blue past the end of it all. There was an altar of piled stone at the tide line. There was a basket with barley grain in it, and under the barley, where nobody was supposed to look, the knife There was a bowl of fresh water, and a boy standing ready to carry it. Everything a sacrifice needs was on that beach, except the animal. And that was the plan. He waded out until the water was at his knees, and he said it loud enough for the back of the crowd to hear. "Send me a sign out of this water. Something that could only have come from you. In front of these people. This morning. Where every man and woman standing here can see it. And whatever you send me, I give straight back. It goes on that altar before the sun is much higher. That is the deal. These people are the witnesses to it." Then he stood there and waited, long enough that men in the back started shifting their feet, long enough that the ones nearest him could see the muscle working in his jaw. The water changed about 100 yards out. It came up in a swell that had nothing to do with the day. There was no wind, and no boat, and nothing behind it. And it rose anyway. Smooth and heavy, the way water rises over something large moving underneath it. And it came in toward the beach carrying its own line of foam. The crowd made a sound. Then the swell broke open in the shallows, and the animal came up through it. He walked out of that water and stood in the wash with the sea running off him. And he was white. Understand what that word was doing in the mouths of the people who first told this. Livestock in that world was brown and dun, and black and roan, dusty, patched, marked up by weather and work. This was white, the way a cloud is white at noon in July. It hurt to look straight at him. He was enormous through the chest and clean in the legs, and there was not a mark on him anywhere. And he came up onto the wet sand and stopped, and stood in front of several thousand people. And he was not afraid of one of them. Nobody on that beach had a single doubt about what they were looking at. The exercise worked perfectly. Minos turned around and looked at the men who had spent a whole season debating whether heaven meant him or one of his brothers. And there was nothing left of that debate at all. His brothers were gone from the island inside the year. One of them went east and made himself a kingdom in Asia and did very well there. The throne of Crete was settled, and it stayed settled for the rest of a long life. And every ship on that water carried the news outward that the king of Crete could ask the sea for a favor and get one. So he had what he came for. All that was left was the second half of the sentence he had said out loud in front of witnesses. Here the story slows down, and it is worth slowing down with it. Because this is the hinge. The whole night swings on. The bull went up to the palace pens, instead of onto the altar. Not with any announcement. There was a delay. And delays are ordinary. An animal like that needs looking at. There are auspicious days and less auspicious ones. The priests can be consulted. Nobody on Crete thought a thing about it in the first week, and during that week the king went down and stood at the rail of the pen and looked at what he had promised away. That is the picture to hold. A man in his 40s, alone at a fence in the evening, with the light going orange over the hills, looking at the finest animal any of them had ever seen. He is the most powerful person in that sea, and he has just been handed proof of it. And the proof is standing 12 feet away, chewing. And the arrangement is that in a day or two, it goes on a fire. He picked out the finest bull in his own herd instead. A genuinely fine animal. The best on the island, by any ordinary measure. And he had that one led down to the shore and put on the altar in the other one's place. It was a proper sacrifice. The barley went on. The water went around. The knife came out from under the grain the way it was supposed to. The thigh bones burned and the smoke went up off that beach and out over the water in a good straight column, which is exactly what everybody watched for and exactly what everybody wanted to see. By every visible measure, it was a correct and generous offering from a grateful king. And the men standing on that sand went home and said so. He had asked for a sign. And the trouble with signs is that they stay. Now here is the part that never gets told right. And it is the part that should keep turning over in your head as you go down towards sleep. Nothing happened. No thunder. No wave. The sea did not stand up. Nobody came out of the water in a rage to say the price was short. The smoke went up. The crowd went home. The summer went on. And the harvest came in. And the ships went out and came back, loaded with tin and copper and gold. And the season turned, and Crete had the best year it had had in a generation. Weeks went by like that. Then months. If you had been standing on that island in those months, and somebody had asked you whether the king got away with it, you would have looked around at the traffic in the harbour and the grain piled in the storerooms, and you would have said yes, obviously, and you would have been right about everything you could see. The bull went on grazing in the royal herd, white in the green, easy to pick out from any window on that side of the palace, and the sea, which had been asked for a sign and had sent one, said nothing at all. When it finally came, it did not go anywhere near the king. That is the first thing to say about it, and the hardest. Minos broke the promise. Minos kept the animal. Minos stood in that water and lied to several thousand people, and what came back for it was aimed, with real care, at his wife. Her name was Pasiphae, and she was not a minor figure in that palace. She came from a very old and very bright line. Her brother ruled at Colchis, at the far eastern edge of the world, where the golden fleece hung in a grove of oaks. Her niece was Medea, who is going to walk into this story again a long way from here, with a cup in her hand, and her father was Helios, the sun. Hold that, because of what he was. Helios drove the light up over the rim of the world every morning of every day, without one missed shift in the entire history of days. And the one thing the ancient world agreed on about him was that he saw everything. Nothing under the sky was hidden from him. Courts appealed to him. Oaths were sworn on him. He was the witness of record for the whole world. So, when the sea went looking for a way to make a Cretan king feel something, the woman it settled on was the daughter of the one being in creation who could not look away. What was done to her? The old writers set down in a sentence, and turn away from, and so will I. A god reached into a woman's mind and put something there that she had not chosen and could not get out. It was a curse in the exact sense that word carried in that world. An affliction placed from the outside, aimed by one power at another, and landing on a third, who happened to be standing in the way. She had done nothing. No source anywhere says she had. She was the instrument, and the message was for her husband. She kept it to herself for as long as a person can keep a thing like that. Then she went to the only man on the island who solved problems nobody else could solve. His name was Daedalus, and he was not Cretan. He was an Athenian, out of a good family in that city. And he had the finest pair of hands anybody in the Greek world had ever heard of. Statues that looked like they were about to step down off the base. Joints that held without glue. Tools nobody had thought of yet. If you have ever known a man who can look at a broken thing for 30 seconds and then tell you exactly what is wrong with it, you know the type. Daedalus was the type turned all the way up, and he was on Crete because he could not go home. He had taken on his sister's boy as an apprentice, and the boy turned out to be better than him. The boy invented the saw, they said, from looking at the spine of a fish, then the compass, from watching 2 sticks turn on a pin, and one afternoon on the height of the Acropolis in Athens, with nobody else up there, the boy went over the edge. The city put Daedalus on trial for it, and he left before the matter was finished. And he crossed the water to the richest court in that sea, and offered his hands to a king. And the king took him. Remember that. Because everybody in this story is carrying something. And that is what the builder was carrying the night the queen came to his workshop. She asked him for a device. He built it. The old writers give that a line and a half. And I am giving it the same. It was a hollow frame of wood, made by the best carpenter alive. Finished well, because he never in his life finished anything badly. It let her get near the animal in the pen. That is the whole of what needs saying. And the Greeks themselves rarely said more. What I will describe is the workshop, because that is where the weight of this actually sits. It was work he did at night. There was a cloth kept within arm's reach, and the frame went under it, whenever footsteps came along the corridor, which is a thing a man only does when he already knows exactly what he is helping with. He worked with 2 lamps instead of the usual 6, because 6 lamps in a window at that hour is a thing people notice. And when the job was finished and the thing had been used, the frame did not go into storage with the rest of his work. It did not go on a wall. It was not shown to anyone. It came apart, and the pieces went into a fire, and he stood there until they were gone. There is no drawing of it anywhere in the ancient record, and there never was. And the man who made it never spoke about it again as far as anybody wrote down. He carried his tools back to their places on the bench, the way he always did. Crete went on about its business, and 9 months is 9 months, whether anyone is counting or not. The birth happened inside the palace, in the women's rooms, with the doors shut. Whatever was said in that room stayed in it. What comes down to us is the fact of it and the reaction to it. And the reaction started immediately, and it never stopped. The child had the body of a boy and the head of a bull. That is the description that survived. And it is the one that got painted on cups and cut into gemstones for the next 1,000 years. And the ancient world was remarkably consistent about it. Human below, bull above, 2 things that do not go together, joined at the shoulders. Breathing. Now watch what a royal house does with a thing like that. Because they did not do the obvious. They kept him. He was fed. He was housed. He had people assigned to him. Somebody carried him and washed him and sat up with him at night. And the palace at Knossos absorbed him the way a large institution absorbs anything, by making a small, quiet department for it, and leaving that department off the schedule. The queen was the daughter of the sun and the wife of the king, and she was not a woman. Anybody on that island was going to overrule about the disposition of a child. Nowhere does any account say she asked for him to be taken away, and he had a name. This is the strangest surviving detail in the whole story, and almost nobody knows it. Some of the oldest accounts give him one. They call him Asterion, or Asterius, which in Greek carries the sense of stars. The starry one, the one belonging to the stars. That name got written down by serious ancient writers, in plain lists, right alongside the names of kings. Only there is a second thing that name does, and the Greeks would have heard it instantly, and we do not. Asterion was already a name in that family. It belonged to the king of Crete, who married Europa when she came across the water on the back of the white bull, the man who took in her children and raised them as his own. Minos grew up in that man's house. Minos held the throne of Crete because that man had held it first. So the child got the name of the grandfather of the house, in the ordinary way that royal children get names. Or he got a name that means starlight, or those were always the same thing. Both readings have been sitting there in the record for 2,500 years and nobody has ever settled it. And I am going to leave them exactly where I found them. What I can tell you is which name won. Nobody in the world remembers him as Asterion. What history kept is a compound word, and the word is Minotauros, and it comes apart into 2 pieces, Minos and Tauros, the bull of Minos. That is not a name. It is an inventory tag. It says who the animal belonged to. He carried the name of the man who was not his father for 3,000 years, and he carries it tonight, on every book jacket and every museum label, and in the title of what you are listening to right now. Now the years start moving, and the palace begins to lose control of the situation. He grew, and he grew like his father's side, and there was nothing gradual about it. A boy of 5 who is the size of a grown man is a difficulty no household staff has a procedure for. Doorways built for people stopped being adequate. A bronze door pin, the kind that carries a hinge and is thicker than your thumb, came out of its socket bent. A wooden frame in one of the inner rooms was pulled clean out of the wall, and carpenters were sent up to rebuild it and sent away again the same afternoon. And there was the question of what he ate. which the ancient writers state and do not dwell on, and neither will I. It became a problem the palace could not solve quietly. Later, it would become the reason ships came from Athens. For now, it is enough to say that the arrangement inside those rooms got harder every year, and everyone involved knew which direction it was heading. The staff turned over. That detail is worth noticing because it is the kind of thing that actually happens. People who worked that corridor asked to be moved to other duties, and were moved, and were replaced. And the replacements did not last either. The rooms on that side of the palace emptied out around him. First, the ones next door, then the rest of the hallway, then the wing, and the doors along that hallway started to be locked. From the outside, a palace of 1,000 rooms, and no room for him. That was the practical problem. The other arm was bigger, and it is the one that finally moved the king. Crete was not a private place. That palace ran on traffic. Every season brought captains and merchants and envoys up the hill from the harbour, men from Egypt and the Levant and the islands, and they were fed and housed and walked through the painted corridors on purpose, because impressing them was half of what the building was for. Hundreds of people worked in it: cooks, clerks, weavers, potters, boys carrying things from one end to the other. A palace is a town. You cannot keep a secret in a town. You can only keep it for a while, and this secret was worse than embarrassing, because anybody who looked at it could read it backward. Everybody on that island had stood on that beach. Everybody had watched the white bull come up out of the surf, and everybody had watched the smoke go up off the altar afterward, and everybody had gone home satisfied. Now there was a thing living in the north wing that made a liar out of that entire morning. It was the receipt. It sat in the house of the man who had asked the sea for a sign, and it proved exactly what he had done with what he got. Minos had built his whole authority on one public transaction, and the evidence against him was growing about a foot a year and getting stronger every season. He could have ended it. That option was available to him from the first day, and it stayed available, and the ancient sources never once say he considered it. What he decided instead was that the thing had to go somewhere, not out of the world, out of sight, out of reach, out of the reports captains carried home, and into a place with a door on it that opened only when he said so. So Minos sent for Daedalus a second time, and this time he did not ask for something that would let anybody in. Sit in that workshop while the king explains what he wants, because it is one of the strangest jobs ever handed to a builder. He is not asking for a cage. A cage is easy, and Crete already had men who could build one. He is not asking for a dungeon either, because a dungeon is a hole with a lid, and there is nothing in it to design. What he wants is a building that does the work of a jailer without a jailer in it. Something you can put a living thing inside of and then walk away from. It has to hold something very strong for the whole of its life, with no lock it can push against and no wall it can find the end of. And here is the second half of it, the half that makes the job impossible. It has to be big, big enough that whatever is inside can walk as long as it wants and never come up against the same corner twice in a way that teaches it anything. Every prison ever built needs a keeper. Daedalus was asked for one that needed none. He took the job. The ancient writers do not record that he objected, and he had already built one thing for that family in the dark. So he was not in a strong position to start objecting now. What he came up with was a shape, and there is an argument attached to that shape that has been running for 2,500 years, and you should hear both sides of it before we go down there. Here is the first side. The city of Knossos minted coins for centuries, silver and bronze, and on the back of a great many of them they put their most famous export, which was this building. You can look at those coins in a museum case today. Sometimes the design is square, and sometimes it is round, and it is always the same idea. A line, folded back on itself over and over, working inward in tight courses toward a center. Here is the second side. The people who wrote the story down described something else entirely. They said winding passages. They said a man could not find his way back out. Every account agrees that the terror of the place was getting lost in it. And you cannot get lost in a corridor that never branches. Both of those survived. The coins kept one thing, and the poets kept another. And no scholar alive has ever squared them to everybody's satisfaction. What I will do is tell you what that building would have had to be in order to do its job. And you can hold the coin in your other hand while I do it. Because the real work of the place was never about the floor plan. It was about what happens to a person inside a large stone structure with no daylight in it. And Daedalus understood that better than anybody alive. Start with sound. Cut stone does something to noise that natural rock does not. A flat wall throws a sound back clean. Two flat walls facing each other throw it back and forth. And a corner takes a sound, turns it, and delivers it somewhere it has no business being. Daedalus built with that. He put the turns where the echoes would cross. Stand anywhere in the finished building and clap your hands one time. And the answer comes back at you from 3 places. And one of them is behind you, then light. And this is the part that does the real work. Daylight in a building like that comes down through shafts. And it gets about as far as the first corner, and then it is finished. Go 3 turns in, and there is none at all. None. The only light there will ever be is whatever you are carrying. And a torch shows you the wall in front of you, and about 8 feet of floor, and nothing else. It also ruins your eyes for anything past that circle. You are not walking through a building. You are walking through a small moving room made of firelight. And the building is only ever the next 8 feet of it, and a torch burns down. That is the other half of the arithmetic, and there is no arguing with it. Now the construction, which took years. There were crews, quarrymen and masons and carpenters and boys hauling water, and ox carts coming up from the quarry all day for season after season, and timber for scaffolding coming in by ship. You do not hide a project like that, and Minos did not try. The island simply knew that the king was building something below the palace, and that it was very large. What the island did not know was the shape of it. The old accounts say the plan lived in one place, which was his head. The crews worked in sections. A mason would be handed a stretch of wall and the angles for it, and nothing else. And he would build it. And then he would be moved somewhere else. And he would never see how his piece met the next man's piece. There were foremen who could have described a wing. There was nobody on that island except one Athenian who could have drawn the whole thing on a floor. Then one season it was done. The old sources do not give us the day they moved him. There is no scene of it anywhere. No crowd. No ceremony. Nothing. It happened. And the people who wrote this story down did not think it was worth a line. The last thing Daedalus did on that job was stand and watch a door close. It was stone, and it closed the way stone closes. And after that the corridor on his side of it was quiet. Now we go back down, and this time we stay a while. The building is finished. The crews are paid and gone. The scaffolding is down. The ox carts have stopped coming up the road from the quarry, and the grass has grown back over the ruts they left in it. Above ground, on that hill, there is a palace with 1,000 rooms and painted walls and open courts full of light, and the business of an empire runs through it every day of the year. Below that, reached by one stone door on the north side of the grounds, there is a structure nobody goes into. Somebody lives in it. Start with the light, because it governs everything else. There is a little, not much, and never in the same place twice in a day, but a little. Daedalus put shafts down into that structure the way the palace above it had shafts, because a sealed stone building with no air moving in it becomes something worse than a prison very fast. So there are places, a handful of them, where a hole in the roof lets a column of daylight fall down through the dark and land on a patch of floor. It arrives in the morning as a long, slanted bar, thin and white and full of drifting dust. Through the middle of the day it swings across the stones, shortening, getting harder and brighter, until for a little while around noon it stands almost straight down, and you could put a hand in it and feel warmth. Then it leans the other way, and stretches out, and goes orange, and climbs the far wall, and thins, and goes. That bar of light is the only clock in the building. Nothing else down here changes at all. He knows where those shafts are. Of course he knows. There are only a handful of them in a structure that size, and everything that lives anywhere learns the good spots. Now the food door, because that is the other thing that happens. It is not the main door. The main stone door on the north side is a serious piece of engineering, and it takes several men and a lever to move. And it is opened almost never. What gets used is smaller. Further along, at the end of a service corridor that runs down from the palace kitchens, the procedure was fixed and it was quick. 2 men come along the corridor. They stop. One of them sets a load down on the stone inside the opening. Then, the closing. And there is nothing slow about the closing. The men on that duty had orders not to speak. So what came through that opening was boots on stone, and the scrape of something being set down, and boots again, and the shut. That is the second event of the day. Light comes in the morning and goes at night. Food comes, and the door closes. In between there is a stone building with something enormous walking around inside it. Let me tell you what the walking is like, because it is most of what there is. The corridors are cut in that hard grey Cretan limestone, and after a while they are not all identical anymore. Not to somebody who has been in them for years. This wall has a course of blocks laid a little off true, and your shoulder finds it every time you come along here in the dark. That corner is sharper than the others. This stretch of floor is smoother than the rest, and it is smoother because of you. Because you have come along here so many times that you have polished it, which is a thing feet actually do to stone. Given enough years, there is water somewhere. You can hear it in the deep parts, running behind a wall or under the floor. And it never stops, and it never changes. There is a place where the air moves against your face, which means the corridor beyond it is long or opens into something. And there is a place where the air is dead still, and the sound of your own breathing comes back at you off a wall you cannot see. Every one of those corridors goes somewhere. None of them goes out. That is the design, working. That is exactly what Daedalus was paid for. There is room to move. Miles of it. More room than most people in the ancient world had in their whole lives. Walk all day if you want. Walk all night. There is no difference between the two. The building will keep providing corridor for as long as you keep providing legs. The labyrinth gave him room to move. It did not give him anywhere to go, and the seasons go on above him. Up there the ships come in and go out, and the harvest happens, and the olives get pressed, and it rains in the winter, and the island turns green. And in the spring the hills above Knossos come up in flowers so thick you can smell them from the water. The king holds court. Envoys arrive from Egypt. The queen's other children are growing up in the painted rooms, running on the stairs, learning their letters. None of that reaches down here. Not one bit of it. No rain. No flowers. No cold snap in February. No hot afternoon in August. The temperature under that much cut stone is the temperature of the rock, and the rock does not care what month it is. There is no way to count years in there, because a year is a thing you notice by the world changing around you, and nothing changes. Now I want to point at something in this story that almost nobody notices, and then I am going to leave it alone for the rest of the night. Everybody in this story talks. Minos talks. He stands in the water and makes a speech to the sea with thousands of witnesses. Pasiphae talks and goes to a workshop and asks for something. Daedalus talks and takes commissions. And later he is going to say 4 sentences to his son that people still quote 3,000 years later. Ariadne talks. Theseus talks. Even the oracle at Delphi talks in this story. And the oracle is a hole in the ground with a woman sitting over it. 3,000 years. Hundreds of painted cups and carved gems and wall paintings. Dozens of ancient authors, Greek and Roman, writing this thing down over and over across 1,000 years of literature. Not one line of speech was ever recorded for the one at the center. Not a word. Not a shout. Nothing anybody thought was worth setting down. And nowhere in that entire library is there a single line saying that anyone ever went down there and tried. That is the record. I am not going to build a case on top of it. It is simply what is there and what is not. So the years go by, and the bar of light swings across the floor and goes out, and comes back, and goes out. The door opens and shuts fast. The corridors get a little smoother in the places where he walks, and a long way north of that island, across 4 days of open water, a city called Athens is going about its business, and has never heard of any of this, and has no idea at all that it is about to be dragged into it by an animal standing in a field a few miles from its own walls. The white bull was still alive. Go back and pick him up, because we left him grazing in the royal herd on the day the king decided to keep him, and the ancient writers did not leave him there. What happens to that animal over the next stretch of years is the tightest piece of machinery in this entire story, and hardly anybody tells it. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. He did not stay quiet in that pasture. Somewhere in those years, the animal that came up out of the sea went wrong. He got out, or he was let out, and he went across Crete like weather. He wrecked crops. He killed livestock. He killed men who tried to handle him. And men in that world handled cattle for a living and knew exactly what they were doing. He went up into the hills and came down again wherever he liked. And the island that had watched him step out of the surf, as proof that heaven loved their king, now had him loose in the fields and could not do one thing about him. That went on long enough for the news to travel. And it traveled a long way, because there was a man in that world whose entire profession was exactly this. Heracles came for him. You know the shape of that man's life. 12 labors handed down as a sentence. One impossible errand after another. A career spent emptying the ancient world of its monsters on somebody else's schedule. The 7th of those labors was this one. Go to Crete. Bring back the bull. And there is a detail in the old account of it that tells you everything about how the Cretans felt by then. When Heracles landed and asked the king's permission to take the animal, Minos told him he could have him, and offered to help catch him. The king of Crete, who had defied the sea itself to keep that bull, was by this point volunteering to help a stranger drag him off the island. Heracles did it alone, the way he did everything. He took the bull by hand and wrestled him down and got him under control. And then came the part that is easy to skip past and should not be. He put him on a boat. Some of the old tellers say he rowed him across the water. Either way, that animal left Crete the same way he had come into it, through open sea, and he came ashore on the far side in Greece. Then Heracles walked him inland to the city of Tyrins and showed him to the king who had ordered the labor, and the labor was complete. Job done. Crossed off the list, and then they let him go. Read that twice. The animal was not killed, and he was not penned. He was walked into a courtyard to prove a point, and once the point was proven, he was of no further use to anybody. And he was turned loose in mainland Greece, and he wandered off north. He came, in the end, to a wide flat plain on the east coast of Attica, a few hours' walk from Athens, with hills on one side and the sea on the other and a marsh at the near end. Good grazing, farms all over it, village. The plain is called Marathon, and there he stayed, and there he did what he had done on Crete, wrecked fields, killed stock, killed people. The farmers of that plain went to bed for years knowing there was a white bull loose in the country that nothing could hold. And the Marathonian bull passed into Athenian life as a plain fact of the landscape, the way a bad river or a bad stretch of road becomes a fact. Now bring in the young man who is going to die. His name was Androgeos, and he was the son of Minos and Pasiphae, their oldest, the heir to Crete, and by every account a genuine athlete, the real thing. And he came to Athens for the games. The Panathenaic festival was the big one. Cities sent their best. Androgeos went, and he won. Not one event. The accounts say he beat everybody, took every contest he entered, and stood up in front of the city of Athens as a foreign prince who had just cleaned out their entire program in front of their own crowd. And then he was dead. Here the ancient writers give us two answers, and I am going to give you both, because this is one of the places where it matters. The first is the one Apollodorus keeps, and it is the one this night follows. The king of Athens sent him against the bull at Marathon, whether that was framed as an honor, or a challenge, or a favor asked of the finest athlete in the Greek world, or something colder than any of those. The sources do not settle. He went out onto that plain after the white animal that nothing on two islands had been able to hold. That is where they found him. The second version is uglier and simpler. Jealousy. He had won too much in front of the wrong crowd, and men waited for him on the road out of the city. And it was done in the dark and never properly explained. Take your pick, or hold both, which is what I do. Both versions agree on the part that drives everything after it, which is that the crown prince of Crete came to Athens alive and left in a box. But follow the first one for a minute, and look at what it actually says. The animal that killed the heir to the throne of Crete was the animal his father had promised to the sea and kept. That bull came out of the water as a favor to Minos. It was spared because it was too fine to give up. It was let loose to ruin the fields of the island it had been sent to. It was hauled off that island by a stranger and turned out on a foreign plain like a bad debt handed to the next man. And it stood in the grass at Marathon for years. And the person it finally killed was the king's oldest son. Nobody in the ancient world ever wrote that sentence down. Not one of them said it out loud. The pieces are all there in the same books, on the same pages, set down, one after another, and no writer ever stopped to add them up. Now the news has to travel, and it travels the way news traveled then, which is slowly and by water, 4 days at the very least from Athens to Crete in good weather, longer if the wind is wrong, and no way at all to send ahead. Somewhere out on that sea there was a ship carrying the worst piece of information in that family's history, and it took the better part of a week to arrive. And for that whole week, the palace at Knossos ran like any other week. Envoy, accounts, storerooms, the courtyard full of afternoon light, and below the courtyard, in the dark, the bar of light came down through the shaft and swung across the same patch of stone it had crossed the day before. And the day before that, the old accounts do not tell us where Minos was standing when it reached him. What the record gives us instead is what he did next. And it did not take long. He put the fleet in the water. The bull, a king would not give back, had crossed a sea, outlived a labor, and killed the king's own son on a foreign plain. Nobody in the story ever said that out loud. They just started counting out children. The war was not a war. It was a business arrangement, conducted with ships. Understand what Crete had and Athens did not. Crete had the fleet, and in that age, the fleet was everything. And the Athens of this story is not the Athens you are picturing. The marble temples, the philosophers, the navy of its own. All of that is 800 years down the road, and none of it exists yet. This Athens is a hill with a wall around it, a citadel and a town below it, and farmland around that. And its whole life comes in and goes out through one small harbor. Minos did not have to storm anything. He came up out of the south with the ships and shut the water. Nothing in, nothing out. He took the Athenian holdings on the islands one by one, which was easy, and then he sat down offshore and waited. Because a city that lives on grain shipments does not have to be attacked. The first year was bad. The second was worse. And then the weather turned on them too. The rains failed. The wells went low. The wheat came up short, and then it did not come up at all. And into a city already down to its last stores came the thing that always comes into a walled town that is hungry and crowded and cannot bury its dead outside the walls. And people started dying in the streets, in numbers nobody could keep count of. So they did what everybody in that world did when it got to this point. They sent to Delphi. The answer came back in the form those answers always came in, which is a sentence with a hole in the middle of it. Give Minos whatever he asks for. That was all of it. No number, no term, no limit. Whatever he asks. The men of Athens rowed out to the ships to hear the price. Now, the sources disagree here, and they disagree in a way that matters. The best-known version, the one most of the ancient writers keep, and the one this night follows, says the terms were 7 young men and 7 young women. Every 9th year. Other accounts say every year. Others say every 2nd year, or every 4th. Take the 9, because most of the old writers kept it, and hold it loosely. 14. That number does not change in any version. 7 and 7. Think about what that number is doing. Because somebody chose it, and it was not chosen at random. An army would have been simpler. A tribute of grain or silver would have been ordinary. And every strong state in that sea collected tribute from weaker ones, and nobody thought twice about it. Minos did not ask for grain. He asked for children. In a specific count. In a specific mix. On a schedule. Forever. 14 is small enough that the city can pay it. That is the cruelty of the number. A demand for 1,000 would have been the end of Athens. And Athens would have had to fight. Because a city facing extinction picks up whatever it has and comes out swinging. 14 does not threaten the city. 14 threatens 14 households. And the other 4,000 households in that town go on with their lives. And the wheat gets planted. And the harbor reopens. And the ships come back. And everything is fine again for another 9 years. Every 9th year, Athens paid. And every 9th year, Athens survived. And the city learned to live with it. That is the machine Minos built. And it ran for a generation. Now the lottery. Because that is the part they actually had to do. It was public. It had to be. A thing like that cannot be settled behind a door by important men choosing. Because the moment it is done that way, the city tears itself apart, and every family that loses a child knows exactly which magistrate to blame. So it was done out in the open where everyone could see it. With lots. And the lots were pieces of clay or wood or bronze marked with names. And they went into a vessel. And they came out one at a time in front of the assembled city. Try to stand in that crowd for a second. Every household, with a son or daughter of the right age, is in that square. The magistrates are up front. The vessel is there. And the entire population of a town is watching one man reach into a jar. He draws. He reads the name out. And somewhere in that crowd a family hears it. And everything in the world stops for them. And the people standing nearest them take one small step away. Because there is nothing else a person can do. And then he reaches in again. Because there are 13 more. By the end of it, the square is full of people who are quietly, guiltily, unbearably relieved, standing next to 14 families who are not. Those families go home and have a specific number of days to get ready. And I want you to feel how ordinary and terrible those days are. There are clothes to pack for a journey that does not need clothes. There is a last dinner. There are relatives coming through the door, carrying food. and nobody knowing what to say, and somebody's grandmother in the corner who has stopped talking altogether. Then, the morning at the harbour, the ship is Cretan. She comes up from the south on schedule and ties off, and the crew are not cruel about it. And somehow, that is worse. They have done this before. This is a run they make. They know how long the loading takes. The 14 come down the road to the water with their families around them. There is no fight left in any of it by then, because the fighting was done 9 years ago, and Athens lost. The parents walk them to the edge of the stone, and then they stop, because that is where the parents stop, and then the sail goes up, and it is black. That is the detail that fixed this story in the Greek imagination forever. It was not dyed for the occasion. That was the working sail of the ships on that route. And the Athenians who watched it come and go, year after year, came to know exactly what it meant on the horizon. The way you know the sound of one particular vehicle in one particular kind of neighborhood. Then the ship is out past the point, and there is nothing on the water, and everybody goes back up the hill, because that is the other half of what Minos bought, and it is the half he cared about most. This was never really about feeding anything. A palace that ran the trade of an entire sea did not need 14 Athenians for any practical purpose whatsoever. It was a statement, issued on a schedule, in a currency every port in that sea could read. Every 9th year, a ship left Athens, carrying the children of Athens to Crete, and every captain in the eastern Mediterranean knew it, and every harbour they put into on the way heard about it, and every king who was thinking about testing the fleet of Minos got reminded, without a word being said. What happens to a city that kills a Cretan prince? And the whole apparatus, the fleet and the terms and the lottery and the schedule, sat on top of a room under a palace that officially did not have anything in it. The sail went up black, because there was no reason to pretend otherwise, and the harbour watched until the ship was a mark on the water, and then not even that. Before we go any further, I owe you something. Theseus is coming. He is a few chapters out now, and you know he is coming. And when he gets here, the story is going to pick him up and carry him, because that is what stories do with people like him. He has a name. He has a father and a city and a sword and a reason. Everything about him got written down. The ones who went before him have nothing. Not one name survived. In the best-known version of this, the crossing we are walking toward is the third one, which means 2 shipments had already gone, 28 young people, and the ancient world kept the count and did not keep a single name, not a family, not a town, not one word any of them said. They are in the record as a quantity. So here is what I am going to do now. I am going to walk one of those crossings with you. There is no ancient text behind this, the way there is behind everything else tonight. I am building it out of what the record does give us. The route, the ship, the season, the terms, the door. And I am telling you that plainly, right here, before I start, because we do not do it the other way on this watch. Now, some year nobody wrote down. The crossing takes 4 days with the wind behind you. The Cretan ship goes out past Sunion and drops down through the islands. And on the second night they lie up in the lee of somewhere small. And on the third day the islands run out, and there is nothing on the water in any direction. Nobody is chained. That is the first thing that surprises people. There is nowhere to go. The crew treat them decently and feed them the same food the crew eats. And by the second day, some of the 14 are helping with the ordinary work of the boat, because 4 days is a long time to sit still, and hands want a job. There are 14 of them, and they came out of 14 different households, and half of them did not know each other 9 days ago. There is talk on that deck, a great deal of it. Actually, in the daytime, at night it stops. The last night is the one to sit with. They are in open water south of the islands. The ship is under short sail. and the water goes by along the hull with that sound water makes at night. Nobody is asleep. Somebody at the rail has been standing there 2 hours. Somebody else is talking, quietly and steadily, to nobody in particular, about a street in Athens and what is on it. A corner, a tree, the shop that sells the good bread, going over it and over it. The way you go over something you are trying to fix in your head and keep. Then the mountains come up in the morning. Crete does not sneak up on you. Those mountains stand out of the sea a long way off, and they are enormous. And they get bigger for hours. And there is a long stretch of that morning where the island is all anybody can look at. Then the coast resolves, then the harbour, then the hill above it, and the enormous painted building on top of it. Red columns, visible from the water. The horns, along the roof lines, standing up against the sky, and around all of it, a busy, prosperous, entirely ordinary town going about a Tuesday. That is the part nobody expects. They come ashore into a working port. There are dogs. There are men unloading a cargo of copper 2 berths down and arguing about the count. There is a woman selling something out of a basket, and children playing in the road, and the smell of fish and tar and bread, all of it perfectly normal, all of it continuing, all of it fully aware of who has just come off that ship, and none of it stopping. They are walked up the hill in the afternoon. There is a delay at the top, and the delay is the worst part of the day. They stand in a courtyard in the light, in a line, and they are looked at. Palace people come out to see, because people come out to see. Nobody is unkind. Somebody brings water. It goes on longer than it should, then out across the grounds to the north side, where the ground drops away, and there is a wall, and in the wall there is a door. Here is what that door actually is. It is stone. It is bigger than it needs to be, and it is set into the hillside, so the ground swallows it. There is a mechanism, and there are men who work it, and it takes 4 of them and a lever. It does not swing. It grinds, and the sound it makes going open is a long, low scrape you feel in your feet before you hear it. And beyond it, there is a corridor going down into the dark, and cool air comes up out of that corridor and moves across everybody standing there. And it smells like a well. They are given torches. That detail is in the tradition, and it is worth 1 second, because a torch is a kindness, and a kindness at that particular moment is a strange thing to hand somebody. Then they go in, and the door goes shut behind them, and that is the end of the record. Everything I have told you so far could have happened. What happened after that door closed? Nobody wrote down, and nobody could have, because nobody came back to tell it. So here is the little that can be said honestly. And then we are going up out of there. 14 people with torches in a stone building do not stay 14 for long. There is a corridor and it goes forward. And after a while somebody wants to try a different way and somebody else does not. And voices carry strangely in there. And a voice that sounds like it is right beside you is coming off a wall from somewhere else entirely. Groups come apart in the dark faster than anybody imagines they will. You call out. The answer comes back from a direction that is wrong. You go toward where you think it came from, and it is not there, and the torches burn down. That is the arithmetic of the whole thing. A torch is not a lamp. It burns hot and it burns for a couple of hours, and then it gutters, and then there is nothing at all in that building except stone. They died in there. Every version of this story agrees on it. And the thing at the center is the reason. And I am not going to walk you through it, and I am not going to soften it either. It happened. It happened to somebody's children. And then the door was opened for the next 9 years later. And one more true thing before we go up, because it belongs to the honest account, and it almost never gets said. Nobody down there had ever hurt him. The 14 who walked in that afternoon had no part in the promise, or the pens, or the beach, or the building. They came off a boat from a city 4 days away that had been starved into an agreement before most of them were born, and they were put through a door into the only place he had ever been. 2 things were true in that building at the same time, and both of them stay true for the rest of the night. What was down there killed people, and what was down there had never once been anywhere else. 14 went in that year. The record kept the number and not one of the names. Somebody's children. 9 years later, somebody else's. The path has not branched once. It is not going to. There is a girl in that palace who has been counting. Her name is Ariadne. She is the daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, born into the painted rooms on the sunny side of the hill. And she has spent her entire life about 200 feet above the story you have been listening to. Start with what her days actually looked like, because nobody ever bothers with that part. She woke up in a room with light in it. That is not a small thing on that island. The palace at Knossos was built so the light came down into it from above, through those shafts, cut clean through 3 and 4 stories. And even the rooms at the bottom got a share of it. Her mother's apartments were on the east side, down the grand staircase, where the morning came in over the valley. There were dolphins painted on a wall down there, and rosettes, and a bathroom with a clay tub in it. Whatever else this family was, it was comfortable. In a way, almost nobody in the ancient world was comfortable. She grew up in a crowd of brothers and sisters. Androgeos, the oldest, who went to Athens for the games and did not come home. Deukalion, who would rule after their father. Phaedra, her younger sister, who is a whole tragedy of her own for another night. Glaucus, the little one, who fell into a storage jar of honey when he was small and nearly died in it. And there is a very strange old story about how they got him back that we are not going into tonight. An ordinary crowded royal childhood. Stairs to run on. Courtyards. A great deal of staff. Ships coming in below with cargo from Egypt. And underneath all of it, from the beginning, a thing everybody in that house knew and nobody in that house said. Because here is the situation she actually grew up inside. And you have to hold all 4 pieces at once to feel the weight of it. Her mother was the reason there was something under the palace. Her father was the reason her mother had been made to bear it. Her father then built a structure to put it in, and hired an Athenian to design it, and paid for it out of the treasury, with the whole island watching the ox carts go by. And then her father turned the entire arrangement into an instrument of foreign policy. And every 9th year, a ship came from Athens, and it was met at the harbour, and the people on it were walked up the hill and across the grounds to the north side. And the door was opened. She was in that house for all of it. Now, what did she know? And what does the record actually let me say? Less than you would think. There is no scene anywhere of Ariadne learning about her brother. Nobody ever wrote down the moment somebody told her. What the sources give us instead is a young woman who, when the moment finally comes, knows exactly what to do about a building nobody can beat, and knows who to ask, and does not hesitate for a second. Everything else has to be read backward from that. So here is what can be said honestly. She lived in a house with a locked wing in it. She lived on top of a structure her family had built and would not discuss. She was there for at least one of those ships and probably more. And she watched 14 people from another country walk across her family's grounds in the afternoon light. And she knew where they were being taken. And she knew whose arrangement it was. And she was somebody who counted things. I am not going to tell you she loved him. It would be the easy move, and it is not in the record. No ancient writer ever says Ariadne felt anything at all about the thing under the palace. She may have thought of him as a brother. She may have thought of him as the disaster that ruined her mother's life. She may have thought about him rarely, and only late at night, which is how most people handle the thing in their family that cannot be discussed. What the record does support is smaller and harder. She knew. In a palace of 1,000 rooms and several hundred staff, and a constant flow of foreign visitors, all of whom were being steered gently away from one particular subject. She was somebody who understood precisely what her family was and precisely how it paid for itself, and she had grown all the way up. That is easy to miss. This is not a child. By the year we are walking toward, she is a young woman with her own standing in that court, her own rooms, her own household, her own dancing floor, which is a real detail out of Homer, who says Daedalus built Ariadne a place to dance at Knossos. She is old enough to be married off, and the arithmetic of that is being worked out somewhere in the palace. And she knows it. Think about the position that puts her in. She is not a prisoner, and she is not a victim. She has more room to move than almost any woman in that world, and she is completely trapped, because every good thing she has, the rooms with the light in them, and the staff, and the standing, and the future, sits on top of the arrangement. She cannot object to the arrangement without objecting to all of it, and there is not one person on that island she can say a word of it to. Not her mother, certainly not her father, not her younger sister, not a servant, because you do not hand a servant something like that. So she counted ships. That is the one thing I feel sure about. It is what people in her position do. She kept a private tally of a thing she was not allowed to mention, and it ran in her head alongside everything else. And it was hers. There is a night in there I would like to leave you with. And then we are going north. The palace after dark. The braziers are out. The staff have gone down. The courtyards are empty, and the whole enormous building has cooled off and gone quiet. And the sea is doing its work down below. And the wind comes up the valley and moves through the light shafts, which are essentially a set of vertical chimneys cut through the entire structure. A building like that makes sounds at night. Anybody who has lived in a big old building knows this. Air moves. Wood contracts. Stone ticks. You learn your house. And every so often, on the north side, there was another sound. Not often. Not clear. Something coming up through a shaft from somewhere well below the lowest floor. Brief. And gone. Everybody in that household had learned not to hear it. That is what households do. A staff of hundreds simply agreed, over years, without one meeting on the subject, that the north side of the building made noises at night, and that this was not a thing anyone remarked on. She lay in the dark and heard it. She had heard it her whole life. She was the only person in that palace who had counted the ships. Now we leave the island, and I want you to feel the change, because we are going to be gone a while, north across the water and west, past Athens, down into the Peloponnese, to a small green town called Troezen, sitting a mile back from the sea in a fold of hills, lemon trees, a stream, a temple, a few hundred people who all know each other. Next to Knossos, it is nothing at all, a country town in a quiet corner. And that is the point of it. There is a boy growing up there, and his name is Theseus. His mother is raising him. Her name is Athra, and she is the daughter of the local king. And the boy is being raised well. And there is exactly one thing wrong with the arrangement, which is that nobody will tell him who his father is. The town has a theory, because towns always do. The town says Poseidon. The sea. Some versions of this story agree with the town. That is not a thing anybody can settle. And the Greeks kept both answers side by side for 1,000 years and never picked one. What his mother tells him is nothing. She has been told to say nothing, and she says nothing. For 16 years. What she does instead is take him for a walk. There is a place outside the town, a shrine with a bit of ground around it. And lying in that ground, there is a rock, a boulder, dropped there, ordinary, the kind of thing you would walk past 1,000 times. She started bringing him out there when he was small, and the arrangement was this. When you can move that stone, she said, come and get me. So He tried. Understand that this went on for years. He was 6, and he could not budge it. He was 10, and he could not budge it. He was 13 and could get his shoulder into it and feel absolutely nothing happen. And every one of those years he came back. Because a boy who has been told there is an answer under a rock will keep going back to the rock. The summer he was 16, he came out and set himself and moved it. Underneath, there was a hollow in the ground with 2 things in it, a pair of sandals and a sword, old bronze, with a device on the hilt that meant something to the family that owned it. His mother told him the rest that afternoon. His father was Aegeus, the king of Athens. He had come through Troezen 16 years ago, and he had gone back to a city full of trouble and rivals and nephews who wanted his throne. And before he went, he put those 2 things in the ground and said what he said. If a son is born, and if that son ever grows strong enough to lift it, he can come to Athens and bring the sword, and I will know him by it. So the boy has a father, a city, and a road. Now comes the first real decision of his life, and it is the one that tells you what he is. There are 2 ways from Troezen to Athens. There is the sea, which is a short crossing, a matter of hours, with boats going every week, and it is safe. And there is the land route, which goes around the top of the Saronic Gulf on a narrow strip of ground called the Isthmus of Corinth, and it runs about 130 miles. And in that generation nobody used it, if they had any choice at all, because of who was living along it. He took the road. His mother argued. His grandfather argued. The old accounts are clear that everybody around him told him not to. And he went anyway. On foot. With the sword. Every single thing that happened to him on that walk was optional. Periphetus. Near Epidaurus. At the start of it, a man with a bronze club who worked a stretch of road and killed travellers on it and had been doing it for years. Theseus took the club off him and killed him with it. Then he kept the club and carried it the rest of the way, and carried it for the rest of his life. Cenes, further along, on the isthmus proper. This one worked with pine trees. He was strong enough to bend a full-grown pine down to the ground and hold it there, and he would ask a traveller to help him hold it. And what happened after that is in the accounts, and I will leave it there. Theseus did to him what he had been doing to travellers. And there was a girl left in that camp named Perigune, who had run and hidden in a patch of wild asparagus. And the old writers say her descendants would not burn asparagus stalks for generations afterward, out of respect for the plants that hid her. That is the kind of detail the Greeks kept. And I love that they kept it. Cromyon, a village on the way with a wild sow living in the scrub around it that had killed enough people to have earned a name. He went in after it. Nobody had asked him to, and it was not on the road. Skiron, on the cliff path above the sea, where the road narrows and the drop on the left goes straight down to the water. Sciron sat at the narrow place and made travellers wash his feet, and when they knelt to do it, he kicked them off the edge. Theseus went over that stretch, and Sciron went off it instead. Circean, at Eleusis, where the road comes down out of the hills toward the bay. A wrestler and a king. He stopped everyone coming through and made them wrestle him, and he was better than all of them, and all of them died. Theseus wrestled him and won, and the old writers make a point of how he did not beat him with strength. Circeon was stronger. He beat him with technique, and the Greeks said afterward that this is where wrestling as an art began, because before that it was just big men grabbing each other. Procrust, the last one, on the flat, run into Athens, and the one everybody remembers. He kept a house by the road, and he was hospitable about it. Come in, eat. There is a bed, and then the bed. Anybody too long for it, he cut down to fit. Anybody too short he stretched, until they did. Nobody ever fit that bed, and the ancient writers say the reason was that there were 2 beds. and he decided which one to offer you after he had looked at you. Theseus put him on his own bed and made him fit it. 6 stops, every one of them a place where he could have gone around, or gone by sea, or just kept walking. Every mile of that road was a choice, and he made all of them. He walked into the city that autumn with a bronze club on his shoulder and a sword he had not shown to anybody. And the road behind him was open for the first time in a generation. Travelers used it again. Merchants used it. That alone would have made him famous for the rest of his life. He was 18 years old, and nobody in Athens knew who he was. Athens that year was a nervous town, and all the nerves were in the palace. Aegeus had been king a long time, and he had no acknowledged heir. And in that world that is not a private sadness. It is a standing invitation. His brother, Pallas, had 50 sons. 50. They were grown. They were nearby. They were waiting. And every one of them could do the arithmetic. The old man dies without a son, and the whole thing falls to them. And there was a woman in that house. Medea had come to Athens out of the worst story in Greek myth. And if you have kept another watch with me, you know some of it. What matters here is this. She was the granddaughter of the sun, which makes her Pasiphae's niece and Ariadne's cousin. And this family keeps turning up in this story like a bad penny. She was living under the king's protection. She had borne him a son. She was, by every account, the most dangerous person in that city, and she had a great deal riding on the succession going one particular way. Into that house, one afternoon, walks an unannounced young man from the provinces with a bronze club over his shoulder and a reputation 4 days old. He does not say who he is. That is the part that always gets skipped, and it is the hinge of the whole chapter. He has the sword. He could produce it at the door. He does not. He comes in as a stranger, and he is received as a stranger, because Athens is talking about the man who cleared the Isthmus road, and a king with 50 nephews circling him is very interested in meeting somebody like that. But Medea knew. The old accounts say it flatly and do not explain it, and I will hand it to you the way they hand it to me. She looked at him, and she knew what he was, and she understood immediately what he was worth to her, which was less than nothing. So she went to Aegeus and she talked. This young stranger is a threat. She told him, he is an agent. He has backing. He was sent here to take the city while it is weak. And Aegeus, who had spent 20 years watching his nephews and sleeping badly, believed her. That is not stupidity. That is what 20 years of that does to a man. They set a dinner. The cup was prepared and set at the stranger's place, and it went to the table, and the room filled up, and the young man sat down in front of a cup of wine with poison in it, and everybody in that room except 2 people thought they were having dinner with a hero. Now the sword, the accounts differ on exactly how it went, and the difference does not change anything. In the version I like, the meat comes, and Theseus draws his own blade to cut it, casually, the way any man at a table would, and lays it down where it can be seen. In another version, he simply shows it, having decided this is the moment. Either way, there is bronze on that table, and there is a device on the hilt, and an old man on the other side of the room sees it. He was up out of his chair and across the floor before anybody understood what was happening, and he knocked the cup off the table with his hand. The wine went across the stones. There is a version that says the stone smoked where it landed, and I am not going to vouch for the smoke, but the Athenians told it that way for centuries, and I understand why. Medea was out of that city inside the day, and Aegeus, who had come within about 4 seconds of poisoning his own son, presented him to Athens as his heir, and dealt with the 50 cousins when they came, which they did, and that is a different story. So the young man had a father and a name and a place in a city. That took about a season. Then he did 2 more things, and the order of them matters enormously. First, he went to Marathon. The bull was still there. That plane had been living with it for years. And now the king's son took it on. And here I want to be exact about what he did, because it is not what you would expect. He did not kill it out there. He took it alive. He got a rope on the animal that had killed the crown prince of Crete, and he walked it back across Attica into the city, through the streets, in front of everybody. And that walk was the making of him. Then it was sacrificed properly, on an altar, in daylight, with the city watching, which is exactly what should have happened to it on a beach in Crete a lifetime earlier and did not. I said a few chapters back that nobody in the ancient world ever connected that animal's whole career out loud. That still holds. But you are the one holding the thread tonight. So run it back. A white bull comes out of the sea for a king who does not keep his word. It is spared. It goes wild on his island. It is carried off by Heracles and turned loose on a foreign plain. It kills that king's oldest son. And the young man who finally gets a rope on it and puts it on an altar is the same young man who, within the year, is going to walk down into a stone building on that king's island and face what the whole business produced. He handled the father, and he is about to handle the child. And there is no evidence he ever knew. Second, the ship came due. The 9th year came around while he was still new in that city. The lottery was called. The town went into the square, and the vessel with the lots in it came out, and Theseus went into that drawer. That is the version the old writers keep, and it is the one that matters, because it means he stood in the same square as everybody else's sons and put himself in the same jar. Some say his name came out. Others say he stepped forward and took a place before the drawing even started. Either way, when the 14 were counted, he was one of them. 7 young men and 7 young women. And he was one of the 7. His father fought him on it. That scene is in every version. Aegeus had waited 16 years for this young man to walk through his door, and had almost killed him at dinner, and had had him for about half a year. And now the boy was getting on the black ship, the old man argued, and it did no good. And the reasons Theseus gave are worth having straight, because they are not romantic. He was the heir. He was going to be king of a city that had been paying children to a foreign power for a generation. And a man who intends to rule a place cannot let that go on and expect to be obeyed afterward. He had just walked a road nobody could walk and taken, an animal nobody could take, and he knew exactly what he was. And so did Athens. And so did the 14 families in that square, and he was going anyway. So the argument was really about details. So they made an arrangement about the sail. The old man came down to the harbor with a second sail, a white one, folded, and he put it aboard himself. The ship goes out under the black one. He said, "That is the agreement with Crete, and I cannot change it. But if you are alive, if you are coming home, run up the white one before you come around the headland. I will be watching that water. I have been watching that water a long time, and I know to the hour how long it takes a ship to come up from the south. Do not let me see black." Theseus took the white sail aboard and stowed it below, and the ship went out under the black. 4 days. That is what is left now, and there is nothing in those 4 days to do. This is the quiet stretch of the night, and I want you to let it be quiet, because after this it will not be. The first morning the coast of Attica went down behind them. It does not vanish. That is the thing nobody tells you about leaving a place by sea in a small ship. It takes hours. The hill of the citadel stands up back there most of the morning, getting smaller and paler and flatter, and then it stops being a hill and becomes a mark on the edge of the sky. And then there is a long stretch where you cannot honestly say whether you are still seeing land or seeing a bank of haze in the right place. And then somebody looks up and there is nothing, and nobody says anything about it. The ship is about 100 feet long, and there is one deck. 14 from Athens and the Cretan crew. And the whole world is that deck for 4 days. The sail is black overhead the entire time. That is the detail that does not let up. It is there at noon, and it is there at dusk, and there is no way to sit on that deck without it in your eye. And after a day it stops being a sail and becomes the ceiling of the world. The rhythm of a boat like that is simple, and it settles over everybody by the second day. Water comes around at fixed times, rationed and warm and tasting of the jar, bread and hard cheese and olives. Twice. The crew work the sail in the morning and again in the afternoon. There is bailing to do, and there is always bailing to do. Somebody sleeps in the middle of the day for 2 hours because there is nothing else to do with 2 hours. And the deck is hot, and the sound of a hull going through water is one of the 4 or 5 best sounds there are for putting a person under. They talk. That surprises people who have never done a long passage with strangers. By the second day, the 14 are not 14 strangers anymore. Somebody comes from a family of potters. Somebody's father has a farm out past the marsh. Somebody has an older brother who went in the draw 9 years ago. Everybody on that deck learns everybody's business. Because 4 days on, 100 feet of planking will do that. And they watch him. That is the other current running through those 4 days. There is a man on that deck who is in the same jar as the rest of them and is not in the same situation at all. He is the king's son. He killed the men on the Isthmus Road, and he brought the bull in through the streets alive. And every one of the 14 has heard about all of it. And none of them quite know what to make of him standing here. He does not make speeches. Every version I trust keeps him fairly quiet on that crossing. He learns their names. He sits where they sit. He takes his turn bailing. The islands go by on the second day, and the third. That run down through the Cyclades is one of the great pieces of water in the world, and it does not care at all what is happening on your boat. Brown and gold islands standing up out of very blue water. Terraces cut into the hillsides. A village on a saddle between 2 ridges. A fishing boat working a headland. Somebody's goats. On the third night, they lie up in the lee of one of them, and the crew go ashore for water and come back. And the 14 stay aboard and look at a small, ordinary harbour with lamps in the windows and people moving in front of them. Close enough to hear a dog barking. Then the islands run out. The 4th day is open water, and it is a different colour of day. Nothing on that sea in any direction. The wind is steady out of the north the way it is in that season. And the ship runs south all day, with the black sail full, and the shadow of it sliding around the deck as the sun goes over. And nobody has anything to say for hours at a time. Somewhere in that day one of them asked him the question, "What is it like? What is down there? What does it look like?" He did not know. That is the honest answer, and it is the one thing about that crossing I am completely sure of. Nobody on that ship knew. Not the 14. Not the crew. Not him. He was crossing an open sea to walk into a building he had never seen, to face something no living person in Greece had ever laid eyes on. And every single person who could have described either one was dead inside it. He had a plan for the thing at the center. Anybody who had done what he had done on that road had a plan for the thing at the center. He had nothing at all for the building. And under that building, 4 days ahead of them, the bar of light came down through the shaft and crossed the floor and climbed the far wall and went out, the way it had the day before. Then the mountains of Crete came up out of the water ahead of them, blue and enormous, and the rowing changed, and nobody on that deck said anything at all. The ship came in on the morning wind, and she was on the terrace watching it, the way she had watched all of them. There is a whole day between that ship tying off and the door being opened, and everything in this chapter happens inside that day. Start with the receiving, because Minos made a ceremony out of it. This was the entire point of the arrangement, and a statement nobody sees is not a statement. So the 14 were walked up the hill from the harbour in the afternoon, and the court came out. and there was a crowd in the west court, where the paving is blue, grey, and flat, and holds a few thousand people. And the king stood up on the steps in the good light with his household around him. Ariadne was in that household. She had stood there before. She had seen the line come up out of the harbour road more than once in her life, and she knew how it went. They come up in a group with the escort around them, and they stop in the court. And they are looked at. And they stand in the sun in front of a foreign crowd on the last full day of their lives. And what she had seen every previous time was the same thing. People holding themselves very still. People looking at the ground, or at the painted columns, or at nothing at all. That is not what she saw this time. There was a young man in the middle of that line who was looking at the palace, not at the crowd, not at the king on the steps. He was going over the building. The way a man goes over a thing, he is going to have to get through. Working along the roofline and down the walls and across to where the ground fell away on the north side. And when his eyes came back to the top of the steps, he looked at her father the way you look at a man you are going to have business with. She had never seen anybody come off that ship and look at anything. That is what starts it. And I want to be careful right here, because this is the place where every retelling of this story reaches for the cheapest explanation available, which is that a princess laid eyes on a handsome stranger and lost her head. The ancient sources do say she fell in love with him, and I am not going to argue with them about it. But that answer, by itself, has never accounted for what she actually did over the next several hours. And it never will, because falling in love does not tell you how to beat a building. So, set the love next to the other things, and let all of it stand together. Because a person is allowed to have 4 reasons at once. She had been counting ships her whole life. She was the only one in that palace who had. She had heard the noise on the north side at night since she was a child, and had learned, along with everybody else in that household, not to hear it, and she knew the machine was going to keep running. That is the part that always gets left out. Her father was never going to stop this. There was no version of the future where Minos woke up one morning and decided the arrangement had gone on long enough, because the arrangement was working perfectly, and it was the foundation of everything her family had. 9 years from that afternoon. Another ship. 9 after that. Another. She would be married off to somebody in some other palace by then, and it would still be running. And now, for the first time in her life, there was somebody standing in that court who had come to break it. She went to Daedalus that evening. Everything turns on this, and almost nobody tells it. The solution did not come out of the air, and it was not hers. She went to the Athenian, and she asked the man who built the thing how to beat the thing. And he told her. Think about what she was asking him for. He was a foreigner in that court, and he lived on the king's goodwill. And there was nowhere for him to go if it ran out. He had left Athens with a killing behind him. He had built one device for that family in the dark and burned it afterward. And then he had built the Labyrinth, and both jobs were sitting in him somewhere. He had a son in that palace, and a young woman came to his workshop after dark and asked him, straight out, to hand over the one secret that made him valuable to the man who owned them both. He gave it to her. The old accounts say it flatly. Daedalus told Ariadne how to get out of the labyrinth, and no ancient writer explains why. And I am not going to invent a reason for a man who never gave one, but what he gave her tells you something on its own. Because it was not a map. He could have drawn one. He was the only person alive who could have. He had built that place section by section, holding the whole plan in his head while the crews worked their separate stretches. And if anybody in the world could have put that building down on a sheet, it was him. He did not. And if you have understood anything about that building tonight, you know why. A map is no use in there. A map is a thing you read. And reading takes light. And a torch gives you 8 feet of floor and about 2 hours. Down at the 3rd turn. A map is a piece of nothing in your hand. What he told her instead was better. And it is one of the most elegant answers anybody in the ancient world ever gave to a hard problem. Do not try to know where you are. He said, "Keep a record of where you have been. Tie a thread at the door. Let it out as you go. Do not think about the plan. Do not try to hold the shape of it in your head. And do not count turns. Because you will lose all of that in the dark inside an hour. Just let the line run out behind you. Whatever you did, however you wandered, however many wrong ways you tried, the thread was there for every foot of it. And when you want to come back, you stop thinking entirely. You put your hand on it, and you follow it. She got a ball of wool. That is all it was. And I want that to land properly. Not a magic object. Not a gift from a god. A ball of ordinary spun wool out of a household that had a great deal of wool in it. Because every palace in that world ran on textiles. And Knossos had storerooms full of the stuff, and women working looms in it every day of the year. She took a ball of yarn out of a basket. Then she went and found him. The accounts have her meeting him that night. And they have her setting terms. And the terms are worth hearing because they are not the terms of a girl in a swoon. She would give him the way out. In exchange, he would take her with him when he went. Off that island. Out of that house. Away. Some versions add that he swore to marry her. He agreed to all of it. Then she put it in his hand. Here is the whole thing at once. And then we go down. Her father had spent years and a fortune and a corps of masons on a structure designed so that nobody who walked into it could ever find the way back. Corridors that throw sound sideways. Dark so complete that a man 3 turns in has no idea which way the sea is. The most sophisticated piece of engineering in that part of the world, built by the best hands of the age. And its whole purpose was to make a person forget where they had been. And the answer to it was a ball of yarn out of a laundry basket. Because the building was designed to defeat memory. And a thread does not remember anything. It just lies where you left it. It weighed almost nothing. He could close one hand around the whole of it. Morning. And the door. They came across the palace grounds in a line the way every group before them had come. Out past the west court and around to the north side, where the ground drops away. Escort front and back. In the early light. 14 from Athens. And nobody talking. The stone door was already open. That takes 4 men and a lever and a certain amount of time. So it had been done before they got there. And it was standing open when they came around the corner. And the corridor beyond it went down into black. Cool air came up out of it and moved across everybody standing in the sun. They were given torches, the way they always were. And here is the thing about that morning that separates it from every morning before it. When Theseus stepped up to the opening, he put his hand on the door frame, low down, where the hinge post met the stone, and he tied a knot. Nobody stopped him. It was a piece of yarn. Men who spend their lives working a door are not looking for that. And if they saw it at all, they saw a boy fidgeting at a door frame on the worst morning of his life. He pulled the knot tight and tested it and went in, and the others came after him. Then the door. You hear it start behind you. A low grinding scrape that comes up through your feet before it reaches your ears. And the daylight on the floor narrows, and narrows, and the last of it goes down to a line. And then there is a sound like the largest cupboard in the world, shutting, and the line is gone. Now there is only what you are carrying. 14 torches in a stone corridor make a moving room about 20 feet across. And outside that room there is nothing at all. The walls come out of the dark ahead of you, and slide past and go back into the dark behind. The ceiling is somewhere up there, catching the light and throwing a little of it back down. The floor is the same limestone the whole way, cut flat, worn smooth down the middle from whatever has been walking on it. The corridor goes down, not steeply. It is not stairs. It is a grade, and it runs so long and so evenly that you stop noticing it. And then you notice the air is cooler, and the sea sound has changed, and you understand you are a good deal further under that hill than you thought. Then the first turn, and the corridor goes off at a hard right angle, And that is when it starts. Here is what the building does to you. Somebody says something behind you. 3 people back. Ordinary volume. And it arrives at your ear from in front of you. You stop and turn around to look at who is ahead of you, and there is nobody there. Somebody's foot scuffs the stone, and the sound of it goes off down a corridor to the left. A corridor you have not been in and cannot see the end of. And it comes back off something down there and returns to you as a second footstep. A little later, a little softer, exactly like a person walking away from you in a place you have not gone yet. Every one of those effects is deliberate. A man was paid to build that, and he built it out of nothing but flat stone and right angles. And it goes to work on your nerves in about 90 seconds. And there is no arguing with it. And the turns keep coming. There are places where the corridor forks and the group stops, and somebody holds a torch into one opening and then the other, and both of them look exactly the same, and the light does not reach far enough down either one to tell you a single useful thing. There are stretches that come back around close enough that you can feel there is another corridor running on the far side of the wall at your shoulder. There are junctions where 3 ways open at once, and the air moves out of all 3 of them. That is the moment the whole design pays off. And it is quieter and worse than people expect. Nobody screams. 14 people stand at an opening in the dark and look at 3 identical mouths of stone. And somebody says, "Which one?" And nobody has an answer. And the torch burns down another 1/4 inch while they stand there. Choose wrong, and there is no signal that you chose wrong. That is the cruelty of it. You do not walk into a wall. You just keep walking, and the corridor keeps going. And 40 minutes later, you come around a turn into a stretch of floor with something familiar about it, and you cannot say why. And the cold comes up your back, and you understand that you have been here before and have no idea how long ago. The torches burn. That is the other clock in there. And everybody in that group is watching it, and nobody is saying so. The pitch runs and drips, and the flame gets shorter. And by an hour in, there are 14 lights. Then 12. And the ones that are left get held higher, and the group draws in tighter around them. And Theseus is letting out the thread. Feel that in the hand. It runs out through the fingers at walking pace. A soft, dry weight going away from you steadily. And it is the only thing in that entire building that is connected to the outside. Every other tie has been cut. The daylight is gone. The sound is lying to you. The shape of the place is not something a mind can hold. And there is one strand of spun wool going back over all of it. Lying on the floor around every corner, he has turned, remembering the whole trip for him, because he is not going to be able to. He stops somewhere in the second hour and puts the others against a wall. There is no scene of that written anywhere, and I am giving you the shape of it. Not the words. He is not going to walk 13 people any deeper into this. They stay together. They stay where they are. They hold whatever light is left. And he goes on alone with the thread and with a sword under his cloak that nobody searched him for. Because nobody had ever needed to search anyone at that door. Alone. The building is different again. One torch. One set of footsteps, which the walls copy and hand back, so that a man walking by himself in there has company the entire way. The grade goes on down. The air gets colder and stiller, and it stops moving against his face, which means the corridors behind him have stopped feeding air past him, which means he is well in, and somewhere in that stillness he starts to notice the floor. The stone has been walked on, not by 14 people once every 9 years. The middle of that corridor is worn into a shallow dish, smooth and slightly hollowed, the way the threshold of a very old church is hollowed. And stone does not do that in a decade or a lifetime. Stone does that from something, going over it and going over it and going over it until the rock gives in. He is on a path. Somebody made it. You know this corridor. You have been walking it since the first minute of tonight. Then the air changes. The echo stops coming back off the wall on his right, because the wall on his right has ended. His torch reaches out ahead and finds nothing to land on. And the small moving room he has been inside of for 3 hours opens out and dissolves. And the light just goes off into the dark and does not come back. And in that dark, somewhere out ahead of him, something breathes. And then the walls stopped coming back at him, and the air changed, and he was somewhere with room in it. He stood at the edge of it, and he could not see the room. That is the first thing to understand about what happened next. A torch is a small thing in a large space. It had been enough in the corridors, because the corridors gave it something to work with. A wall at each shoulder, a ceiling, a floor running ahead. Here, the light went out into open air and found nothing, and came back with nothing, and all it told him was that he had run out of building. So he stopped, and he listened, and the room gave him what rooms give you. The breathing was ahead and off to the left, not near. There was distance in it, and there was size in it, the kind of size you hear rather than measure. A slow, deep intake and a long release, unhurried, the breathing of something at rest that has been at rest a while. Then it changed. The rhythm broke and came back different, quicker, and the sound of it moved, because the thing making it had risen and turned. And there is one detail here that belongs at the center of this night, and it almost never gets said. He did not run. He had every corridor in that building behind him, and he did not take one. The old writers do not describe flight down there, not in him and not in the other one. Something at the middle of a stone maze heard a footstep it had never heard before, and got up and came toward it. That was his ground. It was the only ground he had ever stood on. And somebody was on it. They met somewhere in the dark of that room. Now, how it went, the ancient world could not agree. And this is one of the 5 places tonight where the disagreement is worth your time. The Greeks painted this fight more than almost any other scene they had. There are hundreds of surviving pots and cups and gems with it on them. And if you line them up, they do not tell the same story. On a great many of them, Theseus has a sword. On plenty of others, he has a club. The bronze one he took off the man on the road at Epidaurus and carried ever after. And on a whole set of the older ones, he has nothing at all. And it is done with hands. The 2 of them locked together like wrestlers, which the Athenians rather liked, because wrestling was the thing their young men trained at every day. And it was Theseus who had beaten Circe on at Eleusis with technique and made an art out of it. Take the sword. It is the version the writers kept. It is the one Ariadne is most often said to have handed him, along with the thread. And it holds together with everything else tonight. The fight itself was short. I know that is not what anybody expects. There is no long duel in the ancient accounts. There is no exchange of blows across a great hall. The sources give it a sentence, and the pottery gives it a single, frozen instant. Always the same instant. And it is always the end of it. Think about what he actually had in there, and it makes sense. Darkness he could not see through. 1 torch, a sword, and 3 hours of walking down a grade, knowing the whole way that he would get 1 attempt at this. He had been a boy who could not move a rock for 10 years, and then moved it. He had walked a road with 6 killers on it because the road was there. Whatever happened in that room happened in a handful of seconds. At close quarters, in the dark, and it ended the way he had come. 4 days across the sea, intending it to end. The sound of it going down filled the whole room, and then the corridors past it, and came back off the walls, and went out along the passages in every direction. That trick of the building working one last time. Then it stopped, and the quiet after it is the thing to sit in, because that quiet is the end of a great deal more than a fight. 2 things were true in that room, somewhere back in the building, along a wall in the dark. 13 young people from Athens were holding what was left of their torches, and every one of them was going to see the sun again. 28 had gone through that door before them and had not. Those were somebody's children too. And the other one, he had never been anywhere else. Not once. Not for an hour. He was carried out of a palace as a small child and put behind a door. And everything after that happened inside a building somebody drew on purpose. And the only people he ever met in his life were sent down to him by a king who had a use for the arrangement. Both of those stay true for the rest of the night. Neither one cancels the other. Theseus stood in the dark and got his breath back. Then he turned around and found the thread with his hand. For the first time since the door had closed, the building was completely quiet, all the way to the center. Winding it in is nothing like laying it out, going down. The thread had run away from him, and all he had to do was let it. Coming back, he had to gather it, hand over hand, walking bent slightly forward with the torch in the other fist, taking up the slack and coiling it as he went. Every few feet the line came up off the floor with a small, dry hiss where it had been lying in the dust. That is how he came back. Not by remembering. He did not remember any of it, and he did not have to. The wool had done the remembering, and all he did was follow the one thing in that building that knew where he had been. He found the others where he had left them against the wall. 2 torches still burning out of 14. The old accounts do not tell us what was said. You can guess most of it. The part you cannot guess is what those 13 had been listening to for the last hour, standing in the dark with the walls, handing sounds around corners. Then all of them together, on the thread. It took a long time. 14 people in near total darkness following a line of yarn out of a stone building. Single file. Hands on the line. Up the long grade. Around every one of the turns he had turned. And nobody letting go of it. And the door was open. That is the part I do not want to slide past, because it makes the whole escape possible, and hardly anybody notices it. Somebody was standing on the other side of that stone door in the middle of the night, with the mechanism worked and the guards handled and the door open. And it was her. She had spent a day and a night on it. She had a way down to the harbor arranged, and she stood at the entrance to the thing her family had built, waiting to see what came back up out of it. Then air. Come up out of there with them for a second, because you have been down there almost as long as they have. Wind. Actual moving air with the smell of the island in it. Time and dust and the sea. Space over your head with no ceiling on it. And the whole enormous sky doing what it does over the Mediterranean in summer. Packed with stars, from one horizon to the other, they ran, down the hill in the dark and out along the harbour stone to the ship. And here the accounts add one more piece of Ariadne's planning. Some of them say she had seen to it that the Cretan ships in that harbour would not be following anybody. And the way it was done was simple and permanent. Holes in the hulls. Whatever the method, the fleet that ran that sea did not get off the beach that night. Lines cut, oars out, and the ship that had come in under a black sail went back out of that harbour in the dark with all 14 Athenians aboard and the king's daughter with them. Now the sea, and the pace changes completely. And after everything under that hill it should. Wind on open water. Stars. Sail full. Somebody laughing on a deck for the first time in a month. They ran north through the islands, the way they had come south. And there was a great deal of talking on that boat, and I would give a good deal to have heard it. Then they stopped at Knossos, and here the story does something that has bothered people for 3,000 years. Knossos is a big island in the middle of the Cyclades, with good water and a good beach. They put in there, and they went ashore, and they slept, and in the morning the ship left without her. This is the last of the 5 places tonight where the sources will not agree, and it is the worst one. Some accounts say he left her, deliberately, while she slept, and no explanation is given anywhere for why a man would do that to the person who had just saved his life and every life on that boat. Some say a god intervened. Dionysus came and wanted her and told Theseus to go, and Theseus did what a man in that world did when a god told him to go. Some say she died on that island. Some say she was set ashore for reasons of health. There is even a version where a storm separated the ship from the beach and nobody chose anything at all. The Greeks kept every one of those. What that means is that they were arguing about it themselves, and they never settled it. And the honest thing tonight is to tell you so. What every version agrees on is that when the sun came up over Knossos, the ship was gone and Ariadne was on the beach. And then the second half of it, which is the part almost nobody knows. And the reason I brought you here, Dionysus came to that island and found her, and he married her. That is not a footnote, and it is not a consolation prize. He is one of the 12. He is the god of the vine and the theatre, and the ecstatic crowd. And in his own stories, he is the one who goes down into the underworld to bring his mother back out and actually manages it, which is a thing almost nobody in Greek myth manages. He married her on that island, and the old accounts are unusually clear that it was a real marriage and a good one, and she did not fade out of the story afterward. Later writers put her among the immortals, and there was a wedding gift. He gave her a crown, worked gold, set with stones, and some of the old tellers say it came from the hands of Hephaestus, which is the same workshop that made everything beautiful on Olympus. And when the wedding was over, he took that crown and threw it into the sky. Go out and find it. You can, from anywhere in America, on any clear night from late spring through the summer. Look north and about halfway up, off the handle of the Big Dipper and past the bright orange star, and there is a small, neat arc of 7 stars, open at the top, hanging there by itself, with nothing much around it. It is not big. You have to look for it. And once you have found it one time, you will find it every time after that. Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown. It has been on every star chart in every language for 2,000 years. And every one of them says the same thing about where it came from. It is hers, the girl from the palace at Knossos, who counted the ships, and went to the workshop after dark, and stood by an open door in the middle of the night, waiting to see what came up out of it. Her mother's other child was given a name that meant the starry one. He was carried through a door at the age of a few years and put in a room with a stone roof over it, and he was in that room for the rest of his life, and he never saw one. The bills come in now, all of them, one after another, and none of them go to the person you would expect. Start with the old man on the cliff. He had been going up there a long time. That is the part to hold on to. 16 years he waited for a boy to come out of Troezen, and he got about a year of him. And then he stood on the harbour stone and put a folded white sail aboard with his own hands and said the one thing he needed said. The place he watched from, in the version the Athenians themselves liked best, was the headland at Saunion, where the land runs out into the water in a long finger and the cliff drops 200 feet to the sea. Everything coming up from the south passes that point. You can see a very long way from up there on a clear day, and there is a temple standing on that headland now. And if you have ever seen a photograph of white columns above blue water in Greece, there is a good chance you have seen the spot. He knew the schedule better than anybody. He had been counting the days since the ship went out, and he had gone up onto that headland every morning of the last stretch of them, and he had done the arithmetic on the wind. On this morning he was standing there when a ship came up out of the south, on the right heading at the right hour. The sail was black. Why? Nobody could ever agree. Some said he forgot. Plainly, in the wreck of everything that had happened at Knossos. Some said the crew forgot. Some said a god took it out of his mind as a penalty for the girl left on the beach. There is even a version where the lines had gone bad and the white sail could not be got up in time. What the record does say is that a white sail was aboard that ship, folded, below deck, and it stayed there. He went off the cliff, and that is how a body of water got its name, the Aegean. It is on every map in every classroom in America. It is in the weather reports, and the shipping news, and the travel brochures. And an entire sea between Greece and Turkey carries the name of a man who stood on a headland, looked at a piece of cloth on the horizon, and read it wrong. The boy came home a hero and a king in the same hour. He got the throne of Athens because his father was dead, and he held it for a long reign. And the Athenians told stories about him forever. What none of those stories give him is a clean ending. He died in exile, on an island, pushed off a cliff by a king who had gotten tired of hosting him, which is a strange arrangement for a man who was supposed to be the son of the sea. Now, Crete, and the two who were still on it. Minos found out. Of course he found out. His daughter was gone. His ships were sitting on the beach with their bottoms opened. 14 Athenians had walked out of a building nobody walks out of. And he was not a stupid man. He worked out inside a day and a half that there was exactly one person on that island who could have handed over the way out, so he put Daedalus in the Labyrinth, and his son with him. The boy's name was Icarus, and he had been born on Crete to a woman of that household, and he had grown up in the workshop the way a craftsman's son does, and he went through the stone door beside his father. Sit with the shape of that for 1 second, and then we keep moving. The man who drew that building went into it. The man who set the angles so the echoes would cross, who moved the crew section by section so that nobody could ever learn the plan, who stood and watched a stone door close and then walked away from it, went in through the same door with his boy next to him. He got out. He knew the way. Obviously, he could have walked out of there any hour he chose. And that was never the difficulty. The difficulty was the island. Minos had the seer. He had the harbors, and he had every captain in that water, in his pay or under his thumb. And there was not a boat on Crete that was going to carry an Athenian craftsman off it. Daedalus could get out of the building. He could not get off the rock. The sea is closed to us, he said, and the land is closed. The sky is open. So he made wings. He collected feathers and graded them by size and laid them out in rows like the pipes of a shepherd's flute, largest to smallest, and bound the shafts with thread and sealed them with wax and gave the whole thing a curve, because he had watched birds his entire life and he understood exactly what he was copying. 2 pairs, one large and one small. Then the instructions. And this is the moment where a man who has been in this story since the workshop under the palace finally says something out loud that everybody remembers. Fly the middle course. Not low, because the sea will soak the feathers and the weight of the water will take you down. Not high, because the sun will soften the wax. Stay between them. Follow me and do not go your own way. They went off the cliffs on the north coast in the morning and out over the water, and there were people down below who saw them go. A fisherman with a rod, a shepherd leaning on his crook, a man behind a plough, and every one of them, the old poet says, looked up and thought he was seeing gods. The boy did well for a while. He held the line his father set, and the island fell away behind them, and the sea went by underneath. Then he found out what the wings could do. He went up. Any child would have gone up. He climbed away from the middle course, into the bright empty air, over that sea, with a whole new country under him. And the wax at the shafts of the largest feathers went soft. And then it ran, and the feathers came out of it a few at a time. And then all at once, his father was ahead and did not know. He called back, the way you do, and got nothing, and turned, and saw feathers on the water. He buried what came ashore on an island, and that island is called Icaria, and it is still called that, and the piece of sea around it is the Icarian Sea, and both names are on charts today. Then Minos. He came after Daedalus, and he came the long way, and the way he hunted him is the last thing this story tells us about how that man's mind worked. He went from court to court around the Mediterranean carrying a spiral seashell and a piece of thread, and at each place he offered a reward to any man who could run the thread through the shell from one end to the other. He went on offering it, kingdom after kingdom, for as long as it took, because he knew there was exactly one person alive who could solve it. In Sicily, a king took the shell, went into a back room, and came out with the thread run through. Minos had him. He demanded the fugitive be handed over, and the Sicilian king agreed, and asked the king of Crete to stay and be a guest first, and take a hot bath after his journey. He died in that bath. The daughters of the house saw to it. The accounts differ on the details and agree on the outcome. And a man who had run the greatest sea power in that world for 40 years died indoors, alone, undressed, in a tub, a very long way from home, because he could not let a craftsman go. And then the last turn, they made him a judge of the dead. That is the tradition, and it never wavered. Minos, and his brother Rhadamanthus, and one other, sit in the underworld and hear the souls of the dead and assign them where they go. Homer has him down there with a golden staff, giving judgment. Plato uses him as a figure of justice. Dante, 2,000 years later, puts him at the entrance of hell and has him wind his tail around himself to number the circle each soul is sentenced to. The man who asked the sea for a favor and kept it. The man who put his wife's child behind a stone door. The man who turned that door into a schedule and collected 14 children from another city every 9th year for a generation, and buried a craftsman's son at sea over a secret. The ancient world gave him the job of weighing everybody else. As for the building, it stayed. Nobody pulled it down. There was no reason to, and it would have cost a fortune. So the stone door on the north side stayed in its frame, and the corridors stayed under the hill with their right angles and their crossed echoes. And the shaft went on, letting a bar of daylight down onto the floor in the morning. Everyone in this story got out of the labyrinth except the one who lived in it. The corridors were still there. They are on the coins. Nobody had any further use for them. We are almost done, and everything left is a gift. 4 of them, and none of them ask anything of you. Here is the first, and it is my favorite. The Athenians kept the ship, not a model of it. The Athenians believed they had preserved the actual hull, the one that carried 14 young people to Crete and brought all 14 of them home, and they kept it in commission for centuries. Every year they sent it out to the island of Delos on a sacred voyage, and the whole thing was a religious observance from start to finish. And they took it seriously enough to make a law about it. The law was this: from the moment the priest crowned the stern of that ship for the voyage until the day it came back into the harbor, the city of Athens had to be clean, and so long as the ship was away, Athens was not permitted to execute anybody. Now come forward about 800 years. There is an old man in a cell in Athens, 70 years old, convicted by a jury of his fellow citizens, sentenced to die. The sentence came down the day after the priest crowned the stern of the ship, so the city could not carry it out, and he sat in that cell for a month while a boat sailed to Delos and back. His friends came in and out. He talked with them the whole time. His name was Socrates. Plato wrote down what he said in there. 30 days of the most famous last conversations in the history of Western thought happened because a wooden ship that had once carried children to Crete was out on the water and had not come home yet. And here is the other thing that ship did. They had to maintain it. Wood in salt water does not last. So, as the planks rotted, the Athenians pulled them out and put new ones in, year after year, for centuries, until at some point it was fair to ask whether a single original board was left, and the philosophers of that city looked at the thing tied up in their own harbor and asked the question out loud: if every plank has been replaced, is it still the same ship? They are still asking. It is on the syllabus of every introductory philosophy course in the country. Somebody in a lecture hall in Ohio or Oregon is going to meet that question this semester and turn it over on the walk back to the dorm. And almost none of them will be told which ship it was. It was that one, the black sail. Those 14. Second gift. And this one is already in your mouth. In Old English. A ball of yarn was a clue. That was the ordinary word for it. The thing sitting in the basket by the loom. Spelled C-L-E-W. And because of this story, and only because of this story, that word turned into something else. A clue was what you followed to get out of a place you could not otherwise get out of. People started using it that way, about anything that led you through a puzzle. The spelling drifted. The object dropped out of it entirely. Clue. Every detective novel ever written. Every crossword. Every police procedural. Every kid with a magnifying glass. Every time anybody in this country says we have a clue, or I have not got a clue, or follow that clue. All of it comes from a ball of wool that a young woman took out of a basket in a palace on Crete and put into the hand of a man who was about to walk into the dark. 3,000 years later, it is the most ordinary word in the English language for finding your way through something. It is in the newspaper this morning. It came out of that door. Third gift. The one-path thing. The shape I told you about at the very beginning of tonight. The corridor that never offers you a choice. That shape did not die with Crete. It shows up carved and inlaid into the floors of medieval churches in Europe. And the most famous one is set into the stone floor of the cathedral at Chartres in France. About 40 feet across. Laid down around the year 1200. Still there. People walk it. That is what it is for. You start at the outside, and you follow the one path, and it takes you through 11 circuits. All the way around. And eventually it puts you in the middle. And then you walk back out the same way. And here is where it goes. In the last 30 years, those same one-path labyrinths have been built. By the hundreds. In a particular kind of place in this country. Hospitals, cancer centers, hospices, behavioral health campuses. Go look at a hospital courtyard in Baltimore or Portland or Nashville, and there is a decent chance there is one laid into the paving or mown into the grass, with a bench beside it. They are for the people who are waiting. Somebody whose person is in surgery. Somebody who has just been given a piece of news in a small room with a box of tissues on the table. They come out into the courtyard and they walk it. Because there is nothing else to be done with the next hour, and the body wants to move. And the thing people say about it, over and over, is that the relief is in having nothing to decide. You cannot get it wrong. You cannot get lost. There is one path, and all you have to do is put one foot down, and then the other one, and it will take you where it goes, and bring you back out. A shape invented to hold something is now built, on purpose, all over this country, for people who are frightened. Fourth gift, and then I will let you go. It is the one in your head, that coiled chamber behind each of your ears, sealed in the hardest bone in your body, the one the anatomists named out of this story. It is working right now. There are loops in there set at angles to each other, filled with fluid, and there are two small chambers beside them, holding a scatter of tiny crystals. And those crystals lie wherever gravity puts them. That is how you know which way is down. Not because you can see it. Because a labyrinth is telling you. It is doing that this second. Quietly. Without being asked. The way it has every second of your life. It is the thing that knows you are horizontal and still. And it will go on saying so all night, whether you are listening or not. So that is the story of the Minotaur. All of it. From a promise made in the shallows to a bar of light crossing a stone floor for the last time. Everybody else got out. The king got out and got a throne in the underworld. The builder got out on wings he made himself. The princess got out of her father's house and ended up as 7 stars over your yard in June. The hero got out on a thread and came home to a black sail. The ship got out and sailed for 800 years and gave a philosopher one more month of talking, and the one at the center never got out at all. He left no words behind him. The world kept the wrong name for him for 3,000 years, and named a room in your skull after the place he lived. There is one path tonight, and you have been on it the whole time, and it does not branch, and it never did. Sleep now. The door is open, and nobody is keeping you. Good night.